Hello, I'm Vicky Man from Hong Kong Baptist University, and I'm going to share with you how I use e-journals in my pronunciation course. The past decade has witnessed a significant paradigm shift in second language pronunciation instruction and assessment, especially because of the increasing use of English as a lingua franca in global communication. In particular, eLF-based pronunciation teaching and assessment have reoriented from the production of scripted speeches, mainly for error correction and accent reduction purposes, to the increasing adoption of meaning-based and self-reflective practice. In other words, pronunciation assessment is no longer confined to form-focused tasks where students are required to produce rehearsed speeches, often through semester end oral examinations, or to read aloud passages that rarely resemble authentic communicative situations. The long turnaround time for feedback and lack of task authenticity associated with traditional assessments make fostering learning motivation and student engagement rather challenging, especially in Hong Kong, where students are hardly motivated to speak English in and outside the classroom. So now I'm going to share with you how I use e-learning, or in particular, e-reflective journals, to promote assessment for learning in my English pronunciation course. What makes teaching the course a bit challenging is that students are from multiple disciplines and their abilities can be very diverse. The other challenge is what can be done to lure or push the students to do their practice outside the classroom. So I thought, why not make their outside the classroom practices part of an assessment? But then it is a pronunciation course and written records cannot show me any evidence of learning. So here comes the oral journal, or what I call the OJ. It's actually an electronic journal that keeps an oral record of students' critical reflections after each practice. Through evaluating the effectiveness of their practices, I hope students can learn to self-monitor the speech and can figure out a way that can sustain learning after the course is over. So you may wonder, why an OJ? As you know, we have a very short semester. Simple mathematics can tell us that minus holidays and minus in-class oral assessments, I have just around 28 to 29 teaching hours per semester. And our students are very honest. You can tell from their pre-course self-evaluation that most of them rarely speak English. One of them said, "I speak simple English with my mate, or only when it's necessary at school." So that makes creating more chances for our students to speak English all the more important. Now, the $1 million question is, do our students know what pronunciation areas they need to work on? The answer is, they don't know. They know there are problems or big mistakes that can result in misunderstanding, but they don't know what exactly their pronunciation problems are, or maybe they just don't know how to articulate what their problems are. So before doing the OJ, students can sign up for an individual consult. And during the consult, we listen to the pre-recorded passage together, and I will then come up with a checklist or maybe a doctor's prescription, which lists the pronunciation areas the students need to work on and prioritize during the semester. And that means every student will have a customized prescription that says, for instance, okay, now you need to look after your speech intelligibility, or maybe the vowel and consonant articulation, maybe the pronunciation of the past tense or plural endings, maybe stress and intonation, or even where to pause meaningfully in a speech. Then during the rest of the semester, students will have to find their own learning materials and orally record their self-evaluation and reflection after every practice. I gotta say, our students are very capable of finding a range of appropriate materials such as song lyrics, YouTube videos, internet articles, or maybe even TED Talks, usually for those who work on intonation and pausing, and some self-access learning websites. And I tell them, it is okay that you may have chosen a not so appropriate material, especially at the beginning of your practices, because that's part of the learning process. A set of questions that are designed according to Gibbs' popular model for reflection is given to guide our students to evaluate the practice in a more meaningful and systematic manner. So for instance, there will be answering what they did in the practice and whether they thought the practice was effective, why or why not. Let's have a listen to an example from Bosco, a chemistry major. The area he chose to work on was the pronunciation of the ed, or the so-called past tense suffix.
I'm Bosco. This is my first oral practice which aims to improve the pronunciation of the word with the ed ending suffix. I want to practice on this area because I found that I sometimes skip the pronunciation of past tense suffix, such as the ed ending. These mistakes will affect my presentation as the audience will misunderstand that I was speaking in the wrong tense. In this practice, I spent 45 minutes to read the newspaper and to highlight all the words with the ed ending. I found that this exercise was effective because it increased the awareness of pronouncing the ed ended suffix in voiced and voiceless words. For example, the past tense of express is expressed, which is ended by the voice t, but the past tense of suppose is supposed, which is ended by the sound d. In this practice, after reading the passages out once on my own, I would highlight some of the words that I was not sure with and tracked them back later. I could address the differences between my first and second trial by listening back and comparing with my practice recording. To sum up, before this practice, I cannot address the pronouncing differences between voiced and voiceless ending, but now I have a clear mindset to address their differences. I hope that I can do better in the next.
Now let's have a listen to Bosco's reflection for his final practice.
I'm Bosco, and this is my final oral practice, which aims to be familiar with the pronunciation of the words with ed and the suffix. Comparing with the last three practices, I got a great improvement as I made much less mistakes on identifying the ed ended sound, especially on those voiceless wordings ended with the sound of t, which are always my mistakes and my weaknesses, I think. As usual, before starting my practice recording, I first scrutinized the whole passage to get familiarized with the sentences in the paragraphs, so that I can get away from the traps of voiceless endings such as faced, past, and kept. I pronounce all the ed ended words correctly in this time, and I choose today as my last practice of my chosen pronunciation area because starting from the 8th of November, I have already spent a month to study on this area. I found that I can now identify the ed ended suffix without heavily relying on dictionary. So after these 4 practices, I'm confident that I have achieved improvements on the ed ended suffix pronunciation. In the future, I should move on to exercise on other pronunciation areas such as vowels, clusters, and intonation.
I think the most exciting part when grading the oral journals is that students can subconsciously apply their chosen area in the spontaneous speech. In Bosco's unscripted reflection, you can hear that his ED pronunciation is scrutinized, familiarized, and achieved were done correctly. As if, Bosco has more or less internalized the pronunciation of ED. In addition to giving students more chances to practice the pronunciation outside the classroom, I think oral journals can also promote assessment for learning. In their final reflection, students are required to share with me what they think about doing an oral journal. I will play you 2 recordings, one from Carol and the other from Michael, who also won the second runner-up in a national speaking competition when taking the course in January this year.
Lastly, I prefer doing an oral journal than a written report because English pronunciation is a practical thing. I cannot achieve anything if I just acquire the theoretical knowledge without applying them. 1 or 2 practices may not be enough to change my wrong pronunciation habits, but I can gain insights on where to focus on. Even after the course ends, I can keep practicing in this direction. It is not like finishing everything when I handed in an written assignment. It is more like another start to improving my speaking. Lastly, I prefer.
Today's my last practice, not because I'm perfect. There's a lot of work left for me to do after this course. Ms. Vicky Man has helped me identify these problems, but then I'll have to work on them myself. Actually, my entire life. I would say that I think I did a whole lot better than the first time I did this speech because I've done it. I've already been in the semi-final round of the competition, so I've had a chance to practice in front of the judges.
From the sharing, I think oral journals can successfully promote assessment for learning by cultivating in our students the idea of lifelong learning. Now I will play you 2 more recordings, which can show us how doing the oral journals could benefit our students in their pronunciation learning.
To sum up, I prefer to do an oral report like this one because students have to record their speech naturally and they can hear back what they have said after this course, just like a documentary. Also, the recordings can comparing the differences between students before exercising and after exercising. This is an oral improvement course. Speaking is always more preferable than writing because a pen cannot show your tone and sound. Only recording your speech can do so. Therefore, I support for this homework.
So for me, I prefer doing an oral report like now rather than a written report because it is an English pronunciation course and I think that speaking is the most essential part for the whole course. I think a written report can never tell how good or how bad I'm doing my practices, but then if I can make recordings on how do I practice throughout the whole period, it is strong evidence to prove that I'm working hard on the pronunciation area, and by listening to my recordings and I can understand the whole progress for this learning progress for the whole learning process. That's why I like this kind of oral report because I can learn by myself and to record and to remind myself again and again by replaying the recordings. And it is good for me to learn any types of pronunciation skills in the future.
In conclusion, in addition to doing oral presentations or role plays in my pronunciation classroom, I've tried to use an electronic reflective journal, also called an oral journal, as one of the pronunciation assessments. From listening to students' oral sharing, I'm very happy to learn that the oral journals have given them a chance to systematically work on their pronunciation and to critically evaluate their pronunciation by self-monitoring their own speech. I'm also very pleased to see that our students are capable of finding their own learning materials and as a result developing their personalized learning style and learning approach. Another nice thing to see from the oral journals is that doing this particular assignment can cultivate in our students a habit of improving their pronunciation independently and even after the course is over. And that's all for my presentation. Thank you very much.